Chapter 11. What does your fruit taste like? Have you ever bought fresh fruit from the grocery store and then take a big bite anticipating some juicy goodness? But with that bite comes a sad realization that your fruit isn't so fresh tasting after all? Disappointing, isn't it? I think it's interesting that in the scriptures, our lives and how we are to live are compared to fruit. Psalms 34:8 says, "Taste and see that the Lord is good." How can others taste and see that he is good, you might be thinking? You guessed it, by our fruit. With great humility, I humbly confess that the biggest struggle in my Christian life is being right about everything all the time. You might be laughing at my little humility cartoon, but let me just say that when the fruit of our life isn't good, other people will know it. They will leave our presence with a bad taste in their mouth. In the previous chapter, I mentioned that we need to ensure that our hearts are good soil, so our roots can grow deep and produce good fruit. Fabian Fredrickson said this: "The day you plant the seed is not the day you eat the fruit. Be patient and stay the course." Ah, yes, that painful growing process. That process, along with the waiting, was something I also covered in the previous chapter. What is the expression of good fruit in our lives? But first, how many of you have even heard of the fruit of the Spirit? If you have, can you list them all? I mentioned a few already, but I'll list them here again. But you can find them also in Galatians 5:22-23. It says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control." They do sound nice, don't they? But I wonder, have you ever explored the meaning of each of them? If someone were to describe your character, what would be the words used? Is the fruit of the Spirit evident in your life? While you may or may not be able to answer yes to the questions, I do believe we can all tell of a time when we've tasted the bitterness or the sweetness of the fruit of someone's life. Now, here's my next question. What does it look like when God is preparing your heart to grow good fruit? The verses in Jeremiah 17:7-9 tells us about both the good and the bad that can flow out of our heart, and says, "But blessed are those who trust in the Lord and have made the Lord their hope and confidence. They are like trees planted along the riverbanks, with roots that reach deep in the water. Such trees are not bothered by the heat or worried by the long months of drought. Their leaves stay green and they never stop producing fruit." The human heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who really knows how bad it is? You see, it's only in my surrender to the Lord that prepares my heart so that he can produce that good fruit in me. I cannot produce this good fruit in my own strength through merely strained or disciplined behavior. Here are a few questions to ponder before we begin to look closely at each of these fruit of the Spirit. And as a friendly reminder, this would be another great time to have your journal and pen ready, because here's the first question in helping you be mindful of the good fruit versus the bad fruit. First thing, can you remember a time when you left someone's presence with a bad taste in your mouth? Write any or all details about that experience. Question number 2. What would you say the fruit of your life tastes like? Would you say it's good, bad, or bitter? Or maybe just needs a little bit more sun to ripen? Number 3. What can you do today to ensure that the fruit of your life is good to the taste? I'll leave you with that as we take a closer look at each of the other fruit of the Spirit that I believe will assist you to see ways that we can begin to soften areas of our hearts in order to grow in better tasting fruit. Starting with love. Have you ever said, "God, I want love in my heart," but you wondering why you have to love that person? I would never tell you that you are not a loving person. However, I feel sometimes we are so consumed by our own pain or circumstance that it causes us to hate and not love. Okay, maybe hate is too strong a word, but do you withhold your love? Maybe you say or do things that you know will not help in a situation. Is your need to be right or to make them pay greater than your desire to show love? It's unbelievable to me, not once in our journey to restored marriage did Vaughn ever bring up my past or withhold his love to purposely hurt me. I was on the receiving end of love when it didn't make sense. I am so very thankful that Vaughn chose not to act out of his own pain, but instead choose to love. Remember me, that seal caught in the net? Vaughn's unconditional love set me free to love. In our journey of trying to love someone through their pain or even in your everyday life, are you able to choose selfless love? Or do you make a situation worse by responding from your own pain, insecurities, or need for control? I do realize that in the early stages, when we are still healing from past pain and rejection, we may still have the tendency to respond negatively. However, the more we allow God's love into our heart, the softer our heart will become, and the easier it will be to show His love. I know there are many different ways that we can approach this topic of love, and I am merely scratching the surface, I assure you. However, before moving on, I'd just like to say some of the outcomes described regarding forgiveness also apply to love. Loving someone doesn't always mean returning to the same relationship as before, nor does it mean loving will happen quickly. It is a process. And as a friendly reminder, you can't truly love someone else if you aren't truly healed or know how to love yourself first. But I'll leave you to dive into that a little bit more in your own time. But just know that if you hang on to hate or unforgiveness in any area or for any reason, your heart will stay hard and you won't be able to grow in the fruit of love in your life. If you're looking for a great definition of love, I recommend you read 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7 to hear God's definition, and let me read it for you. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It's not irritable. It keeps no records of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up. Love never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. Love is something we must choose. I must choose to love others, whether I feel like it or not. Furthermore, I've certainly learned that love is essential if there's any chance for the other fruit in my heart to grow. I like what 1 Corinthians 13, 1-3 has to say about love. It says this: if I could speak with all the languages of the earth and of angels, but I didn't love others, I would only be a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I had the gift of prophecy, if I understood all of God's secret plans and possessed all knowledge, and if I had such faith that I could move mountains, but I didn't love others, I would be nothing. If I gained everything and even gave to the poor and even sacrificed my body, I could boast about it, yes, but if I did not love others, I would have gained nothing. Let's have a little visit about love, and let me ask you this. Has there been a time when you received selfless love? If so, how did it make you feel? Or when I read that God says, if you do not love, it means nothing, how does that make you view areas you are struggling to show love? Joy. The next fruit of the Spirit is joy. Let's talk about joy for a little bit. Before I went to Africa back in 2012, I was convinced that God would heal me. You see, the slightest disruption to my eating and bathroom routine would cause me to suffer for days and sometimes weeks without relief. And now I plan to travel to a third world country, only days away from my trip, while experiencing another 3 to 4 hour painful night in the bathroom with no relief in sight. I cried out to God, "Where are you? I know you see me. I know you feel my pain. So why haven't you taken this?" I bargained with him and said, "If you heal me, I will go and travel the world and tell the world about your love and your overcoming power. If you heal me." My joy was put to the test. I went to bed that night dejected and wondering why God didn't care about me. This was a regular feeling. The next morning, when I opened my devotional to look for something, the first words I read were, "All my tears," followed by the scripture in Psalms 56 and 8, which reads, "You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all of my tears in your bottle." The devotional went on to say, it's a common misconception that if God doesn't rescue us from our pain, it must mean he does not care. On the contrary, he's very personal with us and cares deeply. While I still didn't understand it, I made the choice to trust him. I went on my trip believing that if he didn't take my pain, then he would be with me in it. By faith, I chose to believe. When we arrived at that airport in Uganda, I had another moment when I was having serious doubts about my decision to go there. Although we received the most amazing greeting and extremely excited to meet the people who would be our host, the emotion of it all was just too much. I actually cried all the way to the host home, feeling overwhelmed and thinking, what am I doing here? But it wasn't long before all of my questioning and doubting seemed to fade. You see, God used the people we went to speak to also to speak to me. From the first day I arrived in Africa, I had one pastor actually tell my father-in-law, "What's this that I'm seeing? This girl in a wheelchair, but yet she has so much joy." When I first met you at the airport, he said, I was so overwhelmed with what I saw on her that I cried all the way from the airport. That was just one of the many stories that I have where God was using my joy to encourage others when I didn't feel it. Was that trip exhausting? 100%. However, it was during that time that I began to grasp the concept of true joy. God was showing me that when I serve him with joy in spite of my pain, people taste and see that he is good. I interviewed Philip Yancey for my Night of Courage gala back in 2020, and he said this. He said, "Vian, pain redeemed is more impressive than pain removed." I was truly beginning to understand those, "God, why aren't you removing this season?" Yes, I was growing in joy because for the first time I was allowing, as Nehemiah 8 and 10 states, that the joy of the Lord is my strength. Are there any circumstances or people in your life that are making it difficult to experience joy? If so, can you explain why? Take as much time as you need, because I know this is hard work. And I know you understand that knowing is indeed only half the battle. So let me move on to peace. What would you say if we were face to face right now and I asked you, do you have peace? What would you say? Would you say, I'll have peace when my bills are paid, or when my kids are settled, or when ... You fill in the blank. Are you waiting for a situation to turn around before you can experience peace? The sad reality is that the majority of people would say they do not have peace. Life isn't easy. We all suffer in many different ways. The COVID-19 pandemic created stress and frustration on a level we had not experienced before and may still be experiencing. Maybe you said, I'll have peace once this pandemic is over. Or maybe you think it's impossible to experience peace as a result of what we are experiencing. What I'm about to say may cause a little bit of a negative reaction, but bear with me. Philippians 4:4-7 tells us to rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, yeeks. Do I need to repeat that? But in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And let the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. In the past, these verses would always make me feel anything but peaceful. Probably much like what you might be feeling as you've heard me say it now. Maybe, like me, you feel condemned, thinking, how would I ever be able to do what that scripture is declaring? This seems to be yet another giant that I would never see fall in my life. So I understand if it's hard for you. If we know that there will always be anxiety and chaos, how can we ever have peace? And how can we possibly rejoice and always? Do you know who wrote that verse about rejoicing always? It was a man named Paul who was being held in a Roman prison. So if anyone had just cause to be anxious, it was Paul. When stressful situations are causing anxiety to rise in my heart, the only way I have been able to hold on to any peace is to do what Philippians 4:4-7 instructs me, by praising God and by releasing my not so good circumstances. That released God's power to guard my heart so that I could experience peace. I read a great article once that said, our goal must be to know Christ in the middle of the conflict. Peace is the fruit of the presence of God's Spirit. This means you can always know peace. We may not be able to always eliminate conflict, but we can know the peace that comes from knowing the God of peace. Now, let's look at a few questions to see how much peace you have in your life. First question is, how often do you experience anxiety or restlessness that causes you to lose your peace? Is it never? Seldom? More than I would like? Or every day? The second question is this: who or what are the common factors when this is happening? And are there any boundaries you can put in place that could help you be more peaceful? Before we take a turn into long suffering, I would like to acknowledge that yellow caution sign again. You see, because when you start practicing the expressions of these fruit by faith, it may make you uncomfortable or even unbearable at times. You may even feel like a pushover or someone who doesn't know how to speak up or stand up for themselves. Or maybe that was just me, because at first, that's what it felt like. It felt like people pleasing. But I assure you, it most certainly was not. You see, when your focus is shifted from pleasing people to pleasing God, you will be able to view people and your circumstances so much differently. Which brings me to my next fruit, long suffering. Long suffering can be defined as patiently enduring lasting offense or hardship. Ouch! Each of these words are tough and hold so much to ponder. Being patient and enduring lasting offense or hardship? Who wants to grow in that? No one likes waiting or enduring, especially if it's through hard times. It's one thing to wait for an appointment or wait for that callback about a job, but in my case, being confined to a wheelchair for over 20 years, or 16 years of being in a prison of the four walls of my bathroom for hours on end, these would definitely give me some education in the patiently enduring department. Was I always patient? Not even close, you guys. Not even close. But now, when people tell me I'm being patient, I simply compare it to the other things I've had to endure. And to be honest, being patient comes easier as a result of the capacity I've gained to endure lasting hardships. There are many situations that we could talk about here where we don't like waiting for the solution or a conclusion. None of these things are fun. There's a familiar verse in Isaiah 43:31. Can you say it with me? But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. Well, you probably can finish the verse without me. But this kind of waiting is all about sustaining expectation. Did you know that in the original Hebrew translation, the word patiently was intended in that verse? I struggled to get my mind and heart around that word. But the Lord is indeed so gracious to give us grace to patiently endure. And that's why it's so fittingly named long suffering. I haven't seen anything more accurately describe long suffering than what I read in a message from a friend. We were actually talking one day about trusting God and waiting on His timing, and she said this: wait, W-A-I-T, is to willingly abide in trust. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but there are some people I have very little patience with. You know what I'm talking about. Those times when you really have to dig deep, if you know what I mean. Then there are others in my life who could mess up terribly, and I would still find it easy to lavish them with grace. But with the Lord, because I am in love with Him and trust Him completely, I will wait on Him and wait for Him. And He gives me the patience I need when I need it. Plus, I am confident He'll never let me down. And if He's late, as I have often accused Him of being, I have come to understand it's for a very good reason. So I willingly abide in trust. Let's pause here for a moment. I have 2 questions for you to reflect on before we move on. Can you think of a situation when you have endured long suffering? Maybe you feel like I did, trapped in a life sentence of long suffering. What about this? I wonder, have you learned or are you still learning from your waiting experience? I said to a friend one time, waiting sucks no matter how you look at it. But if you had a friend to sit with you in your pain and your waiting, it makes the wait less painful, right? Well, we both laughed. Let's move on to a more pleasant and less triggering word: kindness. I represented Canada on the world stage in the Miss Wheelchair World pageant in Poland. I have many stories I could share, but one specific moment really stands out in my mind. That incident illustrates that being generous or kind when you don't have to be, or when it's not expected, goes farther than we may realize. It was the day before the final gala. We were on the main stage practicing our routine. As we were rehearsing, I saw one of the videos on the big screen from one of the other contestants, Miss Netherlands. She was stunning, and her beautiful smile should have been the focus. However, the bright red lipstick smudged on her front tooth stole the show for me. I immediately thought, oh my word, I would be horrified if that was me. I didn't get to see her before we left, so I decided to go right to the producers and inform them. I knew that it would only be a quick video edit, right? The next morning, when I saw Miss Netherlands at breakfast, I told her what I just told you. Her response was surprising to me. She was actually more taken back by my act of kindness for her than the embarrassment of having the lipstick on her teeth. And so when it was time to vote for Miss Kindness World, I was told the vote was unanimous. I was the choice of all my fellow sisters. Well, with the exception of my vote, of course. I like this quote by Seneca that sums up it quite nicely, actually. It says, whenever there is a human being, there's an opportunity for kindness. Yes, I agree. If we are willing to see it, there will always be opportunities to be kind. Being crowned Miss Kindness World was the most surreal experience, but even more incredible was the way that God displayed his kindness through me on that world stage. I've never seen anything diffuse a situation more quickly or ignite hope so quickly in someone's eyes like an act of kindness. Love expressed by an act of kindness communicates that that individual is loved and is valued. No wonder God made it a point to tell us in Ephesians 4:32 to be kind to one another. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you did an act of kindness and you didn't expect anything in return? If so, how did that make you feel? Take some time to write out at least one scenario. Take time to answer that question and then answer this. Have you ever been on the receiving end of someone's kindness? If so, how did it make you feel? I imagine you felt good, right? Well, that takes me right into the next yummy fruit, goodness. Have you ever wondered what it means to be good? How many times have you heard a parent say the phrase, be good to your brother or sister? Or maybe you've heard a coworker say, oh, and by the way, be good to so-and-so, he or she is new here. Would you agree with me that the implication here is that I am putting aside my needs or natural tendencies to treat someone differently? Sometimes this happens in moments when we least expect it, but just know that you really don't know how much it really matters despite how you feel. Do you remember that trip I told you that I went on to Newfoundland and Labrador where I was gone for a whole month? Well, on that trip back home, on our third delay, with 2 or more flights before I could arrive home, there I sat in the Halifax airport, exhausted to say the least. The lady sitting next to me rather imposed on my misery by striking up a conversation, and she said, hello, I'm admiring your beautiful wheelchair. And then she continued, I have had some problems with my feet, but sitting here watching you and your beautiful smile, I feel so guilty because I often feel self-pity. She talked about some other tragic things that she had been going through. We talked, we cried, we laughed, and I even prayed for her right there in the airport. When it was finally time for us to get on that airplane, I gave her my card. The next day, I read this note on my YouTube channel. I've been blessed to meet Vianne King, November 11th, 2019, at Halifax Airport, Gate 20. This meeting will be forever in my heart, she said. I was blessed to see Vianne in her beautiful wheelchair. What a great conversation starter, and what a great conversation it was. She said, little did I know at first that I was meeting someone as ordinary, yet as extraordinary as Vianne. And Vianne, if you read this, she said, thank you for your words, your time, and your attention. You were an angel that was sent across my path. I needed you that morning, and you appeared. You see, being good isn't always as fun or as easy as being bad, but expressing goodness is necessary if you want to serve good-tasting fruit. That express goodness benefited us both that tiring day in the airport. There is a life principle that my father-in-law shared with me one time, and it has been something that Vaughn and I have tried to live by ever since. That principle has definitely helped me be good. He said, never give or lend anything you expect to get back. That goes for money, physical items we have, our time, and yes, even our words of encouragement. There may be many different scenarios in which you can use this principle. However, the real issue is the misplaced expectations. What about when you volunteer your time or encourage someone and we're not rewarded as we had hoped or expected? Are we still able to do good to them? Or are we still able to be good to them? Or do we begin to resent the person and the time we spent and complain that we are not valued? Are we able to truly release these expectations? Who are we trying to please, and for what reward? If we want to be good, we must learn to give with a pure heart and with the right motives. 2 Corinthians 9:7 says this, that God loves a cheerful giver. So choose goodness and give with a cheerful heart in all areas of your life, and leave the outcomes and rewards to God. Learning this valuable principle is a process. It's slow and hard, and it will take time. So as we move on, let me ask you this. Are there any good works or good deeds that you have done which have left you disappointed because you didn't get what you were expecting in return? And does that experience stop you from doing or being good in other areas? Next, I want to ask you this by starting with Matthew 6:4. It says, give your gifts in private, and your Father who sees everything will reward you. Write down one thing that you're willing to try today that will help you embrace and express goodness in your life. Let's let out a big sigh together here, can we? Because I understand this ain't easy and it's deep. So take a little breather or get a refill of your hot beverage of choice, and let's continue on to faithfulness. Faithfulness. When I first told Vaughn that I didn't know if I was able to remain faithful, it was because I was only relying on my own strength. I genuinely doubted myself. But as I put my trust and faith in God again, He taught me how to be someone who could be trusted. But as I put my trust and faith in God again, He taught me how to be someone who could be trusted. I had someone ask me, as I was writing this chapter actually, how do you prove to someone you are trustworthy after you have hurt them? I said, you simply stop focusing on trying to convince them with your words that you are changed, but instead focus on changing you. Your life becomes the evidence of change. Only time really reveals the true nature of someone's trustworthiness. I also heard someone say the only way you can know if you can trust someone is to trust them. Are you a trustworthy person? The fruit of faithfulness applies to all areas of our lives. Would you say something behind a friend's back that you wouldn't say to their face? It's embarrassing to admit that you are not faithful, isn't it? Trust me when I say that that was a quality I hated about myself. I found it so difficult to change. The truth is that at some point in our lives, we have all been unfaithful in some way or another. Being aware of these areas and acknowledging them is a major step forward. How do you grow in faithfulness? The foundation is formed by looking afresh at the Lord as the ultimate definition of faithful. The Bible reveals examples of God's faithfulness. Secondly, we grow in expressing faithfulness as we become more confident of who we are and whose we are. That will send us back to the Word of God every time. That's where the Spirit reveals those areas where we are tempted to either throw other people under the bus, failing them, or to devalue someone else by not being trustworthy. And we in turn devalue ourselves. Once we learn the value of being a faithful person who is trustworthy, it will be worth more than fame or money can buy. Take a moment and let's ask some more questions. Can you list some areas where you feel the quality of faithfulness is important? Now, in that area or areas that you have listed, how faithful are you in each of these areas? Now we are almost done with only 2 more fruits of the Spirit to cover, and you can probably guess where we're headed next. Gentleness. Have you ever held a newborn baby? Chances are, when you were being handled that little bundle of joy, you instinctively knew to be gentle with it, right? I wish life were that easy. However, while our words or actions that pass on to others do not come with warning labels, we most definitely need to be gentle. Philippians 4:5 tells us, "Let our gentleness be evident to all." Is your gentleness evident to all? That is a good question. When we are not gentle, we actually have the power to damage someone's heart. When we aren't gentle with someone, why do you think that is? Is it because we think that they should know better, or we simply think that we are better than them? Perhaps those seem like harsh words, but whatever the excuse we make for not being gentle, the root cause may well be that we are holding on to pride, anger, insecurities, or our need for control. There are many different scenarios I could suggest where expressing gentleness is important, but a basic trait that will help us with our gentleness, and a good place to start, is with our humility. So I want to ask you this. Would you consider yourself then to be a gentle person? And are you able to speak and respond with gentleness in situations? Or are people left with a bad taste in their mouths because of your bitter tasting fruit? Which takes me into the last fruit of the Spirit. Are you still with me? We're almost done. Self-control. Have you ever lost control of yourself? Maybe you said or did something in the heat of the moment and found yourself having to apologize after the fact. Yes, I get it. It's tough and we've all been there, yours truly included. When I was first in the hospital having to experience the daily routine of getting my intravenous needles changed, I remember this one day getting this nurse, and let's just say she was not gentle with me. I was feeling like a pincushion, to be honest. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I blurted out, "Apparently they didn't teach bedside manners in your training, did they?" Oops. Of course, no one is perfect, but the more you are yielding to the Spirit for His fruit of self-control to grow in your heart, the better you will become at denying yourself or having better self-control. As we are growing in expressing what He is growing in our prepared hearts, we also grow in seeing situations through a different lens. And while there are areas which we could consider a safe place or a safe environment for growing, the reality is, quite often, you don't have the luxury of that safe place. but we can always make it our goal to be a safe place for others, even under the pressure. As you have already heard me say, that traveling is hard on me physically. So the normal everyday is not so normal for me. This is what I was contending with when I was on another one of my speaking tours. My mother and I were driving to the next town for the location where I was scheduled to speak. We decided to stay overnight at a local inn. We arrived early, got settled, and looked forward to a great meal after a long day of travel. I remember looking at the menu and wanting everything. Can you relate to that? The selection process was difficult, but I finally decided and placed my order. When the plate of hot stew and fresh dinner rolls were placed in front of me, I didn't even pay attention to how fast I was eating. After I took a few bites, I stopped and I hesitantly asked my mom if her meal had an odd taste on it too. I said, I can't quite tell what it is, but I know something isn't right. It didn't take long for us to realize that it tasted like mold. Mold? I knew I had to tell the waitress why we had stopped eating our meal, especially after expressing how hungry we were. Even though we had every right to complain, I decided to simply inform her rather than to sharply complain. She apologized profusely and didn't know how this could have happened. We finished and we still left her a good tip. I knew that I could have shown God's love by not complaining or making her feel any worse than she already did. Did I always get this right? No. But after what came next, you can be sure I now always try. I spoke at the event and we continued on, and much to my pleasant surprise, the next day I found this note waiting in my inbox from the owner of the inn where we had stayed. Let me read it for you. Vienne, it was a pleasure to meet you. You truly are an inspiration. I want to apologize for the meal you had because this was in no way our standard or what we pride ourselves for. Please come by again on your travels and allow us to treat you properly, free of charge. I do hope you come back and see us again, and having an awful stay, you were gracious, sweet, kind, and forgiving. It was our pleasure truly to meet you. God bless. Now there might be some of you saying that I am just a pushover, afraid to speak up because of my people-pleasing tendencies, but I assure you that not responding kindly in these situations, it's much more the heart of God than if I had ranted about it. I love how we have the opportunity to feed people good fruit, even when we least expect it. Because my heart was soft with love and patience, I was able to offer good fruit. What does your fruit taste like? And please understand that this is not to judge you or make you feel bad. It's to help you. So when you're ready, let's close out the chapter with a few questions and final thoughts. First question is this. Has there been a time when you have allowed your emotions to control the way you responded in a situation? And if so, explain what you were feeling when you lost control. Why do you think you couldn't control yourself in that moment? And lastly, on a scale of 1 to 10, what does your fruit taste like? 1 to 2 is, no one wants to eat my fruit. 3 to 5 is, I have a seed, but the soil of my heart still needs to be softened. 6 to 7, maybe it's bitter to the taste, but I'm still growing. 8 to 10 is, my fruit is ripe and tastes sweet. Without a doubt, God is preparing your heart in order to grow good fruit and to keep producing good fruit. And don't forget, it doesn't matter, how much you say. Jesus loves you. No one will believe you if the fruit of your life does not taste good. As you learn to view yourself and your circumstances differently, it is my prayer that you'll either see Jesus more accurately or you will represent Jesus more accurately. Either way, my prayer today is that people will taste and see that He is good. I know some people get uncomfortable talking about how Jesus can take your pain or that He gives strength. Maybe I would suggest that it's because you have had a bad experience with bad tasting fruit. Thus, if you have not been properly introduced to the one who can really make the difference in your life, if that's the case, let me say that, first of all, I am sorry that you've had a bad experience. May I have the privilege to ask you to consider Jesus as an option if you are struggling to find that love, joy, or peace in your life. My last little morsel of food for thought as we journey on is this. I pray that you begin to see Jesus for who He truly is, because no matter what lies ahead or what lies you've believed about yourself or your experience with bad tasting fruit, He wants you to know that He loves you unconditionally, and He wants you to taste and see that He is indeed good.